So, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome everyone to this session on defragmenting the world, envisioning a more cooperative future. I'm the moderator of this session, and I would like to introduce my panelists here on stage, but we've also got two panelists joining us online. So, first of all, I'm very honored to welcome His Excellency Mukhtar Tileo-Bert, the Foreign Minister of Kazakhstan. Also with us today is Ambassador Rastislav Karcher, the Chairman of GLOBSEC. We also have here Mr. Martin Klus, who is the State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Slovak Republic. And we should have two speakers joining online. Yes, this is going to be Mr. General John Allen, the President of the Brookings Institute, and Mr. Ditmir Bushati, who is currently the Special Envoy of the Albanian OSCE Chairmanship. So I'm very happy that we managed to have so many people here in the audience and also joining a few people online. I would like to remind everyone this is a 55-minute session, which should give us enough time to discuss a few things with the panel, but then also for you to ask questions here in the room. And please don't forget you can also ask questions online via the live link, which is live.globsec.org. So this session today is really going to the heart of this year's GLOBSEC theme, Let's Heal the World Together. And I would really like to focus on the together. How can we have a new approach to the many challenges and threats we are facing together in a more cooperative way, as the title is saying. Now, this is really important because the coronavirus outbreak has led to a certain degree of deepening divisions instead of actually bringing the world back or closer together. These are some of the things that are mentioned in the GLOBSEC Megatrends report that some of you probably have seen already. It enumerates a number of trends and challenges that may have even been accelerated or triggered by the pandemic. Now, since these challenges are so multifaceted, I would really like us to focus here today on the solutions. Just to remind you of some of the challenges, maybe the resurgence of conflict in Europe, climate change, the rise of populism, the rise of disinformation, how to deal with new emerging technologies, many, many others. So instead of actually us analyzing all these problems, let's focus on how we can get back to a common approach. Now, the main issue in this context, I think, and that's already my first question to our panel, the virus struck at a time when multilateralism was already under a lot of strain and pressure, and we could observe a very strong competition, great power competition between the US, China, and Russia. And if I may, Foreign Minister, this would be my first question to you. As we've seen this increasing great power competition between the US, Russia, and China, how do you think we can manage to get back to a more common approach, more cooperation, more multilateralism, less competition? How can we overcome the fragmented world from your point of view?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, any tension between United States, Russia, China, and if I would add European Union brings damages on the global level, also in some regional developments. So what can we do? The key word of the answer is dialogue. Just let me bring example of the Central Asia. The challenge of our region is in the fact that we are landlocked countries. So what's happening around our region? So on the north part, you can see sanctions against Russia, Belarus, also the tension between Russia and Ukraine. On the east part, we have China with their trade negotiations with the US administration. Some expertise consider it a trade war. On the south part, we have Afghanistan with the instability and also there's some tensions between Pakistan and India. And on the west, nowadays, we have Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict. So in this situation, we consider that we have some new trends in the regional development. And this is the new trends of the regional integration. So head of our states decided to have constant dialogue. So 2 years ago in Nur-Sultan, our capital of Kazakhstan, we hosted the first consultative meeting of head of 5 Central Asian states. Last year, the second meeting was in Tashkent, and our presidents decided to meet regularly. And also was proposal to sign first treaty on friendly and long-term cooperation between our states. So this is the first time in our 30 years independence development, all 5 countries. And since we have this new trend, we found that, as was mentioned, that superpowers brought some interest to our region. So, and nowadays we have so-called C5. It means that all 5 Central Asian states and United States initiated the dialogue C5+1, and last year US administration introduced the new strategy on Central Asia. And in continuation of this process, we have C5 plus European Union. We already had 2 meetings and head of foreign ministers. And also nowadays we have new dialogues of Central Asia with China and with Russia. So this also shows that the dialogue gives us the opportunity to develop our cooperation with the superpowers. And I just, in this context, would like to note the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, had proposal to consider the concept of new geopolitical reality called 3D. It means the creation of the 3 dialogues. The initiative covers several levels, but I would like to stop only on the first one. It's on the global level as the dialogue between US, Russia, China, and European Union. And in the continuation of this idea, the Russian President Putin proposed to have the summit of the states permanent members of the UN Security Council. And indeed, nowadays, the UN is the one international institution which can cover all issues in the relations between superpowers. And I just would like to say that at the 75th session of the UN General Assembly, our President Tokayev said in his statement that the United Nations must lead the global effort to overcome the pandemic, accelerate recovery, improve prospects for global governance. So the only UN can give us the good platform for the dialogue among the superpowers, also including the middle powers, as now say we have.
Thank you, Foreign Minister. Thank you very much. It's very interesting that you've mentioned so often the word dialogue and how to get back to this dialogue. And that's really the next question I would like to ask to you, Mr. Bushati. Yes, if you can hear me, because your country, Albania, is currently chairing the OSCE. And everything I know about the OSCE, it's about dialogue. How do we manage to get cooperative security on track and basically solve all the problems that have been, some of them have been mentioned by the foreign minister, the conflicts, for example. What's your view? What can the OSCE do? And if I can really ask you, please, to be brief again, because this session is only 55 minutes and we've already spent 10 minutes discussing, so please.
Thank you very much for the question. And as you rightly pointed out, OSCE is a platform for dialogue. It's a consensus-driven organization. It groups together countries from North America, Central Asia, and Europe. It is still the only platform where those three continents are sitting and discussing together. But it has been also affected by this erosion of trust that we are experiencing with multilateralism and international cooperation in general. Therefore, OSCE as an organization has its own limits, as it has been demonstrated also in the institutional setup of the organization. But on the other hand, it has also the three autonomous institutions, which are still playing quite an important role under the difficult circumstances the international order is facing and the OSCE area is facing. Because it looks to me like we have entered into a tunnel. And it's still quite early to see the light at the end of this tunnel, because we have been experiencing a fracture at the global order and a lack of clear readiness for international cooperation like we've seen in the past. And nowadays with the coronavirus, we see also this social fracture coupling with the fracture of the global order because of the economic and health consequences. In this respect, OSCE is playing its own role, but it cannot replace the importance of other organizations in ensuring more international cooperation.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I know that the organization has its limits, but I want to make sure that we try to come up with solutions. So I know that, Ambassador Kacher, I know that GLOBSEC has launched a flagship project together with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, which is basically exactly that. It's bringing back, relaunching cooperative security and avoiding a situation like we've now analyzed and discussed, where basically we are almost sleepwalking into a war, or we are not being able to deal anymore with all these military incidents and potential problems we are facing. Could you maybe explain what that initiative is and how you see it could actually do something so that we get out of this?
Sure. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for the question. You're absolutely right in saying that virus comes already in the time of some certain crisis of multilateral diplomacy and institutions. And always in some category of jokes, I have a good news and I have bad news for you. The bad news is that the virus is causing loss of lives and a lot of people die. So that's not a virtual reality. That's something which is here, which is real. Also, economy is starving, and it's also rising, as you said. All the disinformation's got a new fuel, nationalism got a new fuel for the case, etc., etc. The good news here is that it's also reminding us, all of those bad things are reminding us that we need to refocus and rechange our thinking. First of all, we need to admit that the globalization, it's a reality. That's not an Illuminati or Mr. Soros invention. That's a thing which is happening. As people set on a couple of 100,000 years ago up from savannas north and started to populate the world, this is coming at higher and higher and higher speed. And not only global warming and the climate crisis is reminding us, this virus is an alarm clock for all of us to realize that we are more and more interdependent. And without being together and without cooperating, we are going to be lost. There is a small lesson for us here in regionally. We felt it within Visegrad cooperation, that the virus nor the climate change doesn't care whether I speak Hungarian or Slovak or Czech or Polish language. It's just getting freely across. And there is no closed fence solution here, because then you saw what economy is doing. So we need to have an open mind that the EU is creating platform for that. We need to have a really regionally, locally focused issues and completely change the approach. And stronger union, it's better for us. And then also with the rise of disinformation, authoritarian nationalism, all big multilateral institutions come in place. And here I want to come precisely and end with that, because Minister already spoke of the role of UN and its system. There was already thinking that the OSCE is obsolete institution, which almost has got no role. What is the Helsinki standards and something which is not having teeth and cannot bite. And that's why we, two of us, came together, Friedrich Hebert Stiftung and GLOBSEC, in cooperation with the OSCE, to look into the issue and said, there is a role for organizations like this, because that brings a table family of unique nations where we would not agree on all of the values and all of the messages and all of the things, but it gives us the ground to be together and talk, exchange, and actually in some situations, probably even in today Minsk, if we would have thought more active role if before the ground was burned, maybe we would have tools how to keep things at leash. Or Crimea, and I want to say that we are dreaming. What we should come back to this together thinking in the context of the OSCE, which is great, which is setting Helsinki values, but is bringing people at the table.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, OSCE has many of those tools and try to always deploy them the moment there is a crisis, but sometimes it's not enough or not too late. So I would like to come up with ideas how we can complement all these different tools and organizations that we have available in this multilateral world we are living in. It's just my feeling sometimes is it's not being used properly. Maybe come to you, Mr. State Secretary. How do you, from everything that you have now heard being discussed, do you feel there are still areas where the world can work together? We have now looked at this from a more global perspective. Maybe look at it more from a European or regional perspective. Is there anything where you feel that this fragmentation can be overcome?
Well, thank you, Stefanie, for this question, and good afternoon to everybody. As Ambassador Kaczar already said, we are heavily interdependent, and that's why even this COVID-19 situation clearly shows us how important it is to cooperate. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Organizations are here, but they are only that strong as the member countries wants to make them strong. So we can easily feel that United Nations has some problems because it's still structure from the Second World War or after the Second World War. We felt the same with European Union recently, and I'm very happy that European Union create very quick response to the contemporary situation with this multi-annual financial framework 21-27 and new generation, which is a very new era for European Union. And last but not least, if we speak about cooperation, let's take a look how we can manage climate change, for instance. There is no other way than to cooperate. And when you mention regional cooperation, I believe European Union should be one of the bodies worldwide which should show to the rest of the world how easy it is to fight against climate change if we are stick together, if we are cooperating together, now as 27 European countries, but later then hundreds of countries all around the world. So this is what I'm really believe, and Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic, as well as this government, is very strongly believing in multilateralism and effective multilateralism. So let's work together and let's not supporting unilateral world because this is the way to the hell.
Yeah, thank you very much. I tend to agree with your analysis also that the European Union manages much more than we sometimes think it does. We tend to always view the negative sides of it, but I agree with you. General John Allen, I would like to come to you now and maybe come back again to what has been said at the beginning, looking at it more from a global perspective and in your case from the US perspective. From most people I've been talking to in Europe, basically, we've been seeing the US retreat from the international stage. We've seen all these withdrawals from international agreements, the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, there's so many, the WHO. How can we go back to multilateralism, everything that has been said by all the speakers, if the US is maybe not leading this? How do you view the future?
Well, first, it's wonderful to be back with so many friends in GLOBSEC. 3 of the 4 panelists today are old friends, and it's good to see them. And I don't know the foreign minister, but I wish him well in his work. This is a difficult question to answer right now because you asked that question at the seam of one of the most important political moments in the modern history of the United States, which is the election, which will occur on November 3rd. You know, traditionally, the United States' presence on the global stage in the rules-based world order, which in many respects flowed directly from U.S. leadership at the end of World War II, it took the form of what I would call transformational multilateralism. In other words, all of us together as partners, often with the U.S. leading, but as partners, all of us were far more than simply the sum of our parts. Transformational. We were better than just the sum. And it was multilateral. And so many of the challenges that we had in the post-World War II world, the post-Cold War world, and the world that we face today, virtually all of those challenges at the global level require a multilateral approach. But we've seen in the last 4 years during this administration an emphasis on transactional bilateralism. We have seen the world easier for authoritarians to both grab control or to strengthen their grip on their population. We have seen an absence of the kinds of emphasis the United States put on human rights for many, many years. And that all is exacerbated by 4 major challenges that are being faced by the United States today. And that is the challenge of the virus. We will pass today 211,000 dead in the United States and 7.5 million infected. That's an appalling failure of national leadership in the United States. Number 2, an economic downturn that looks like the Great Depression, with tens of millions of Americans unemployed, hungry, and many of them soon to be destitute as they're unable to pay for their mortgages or their rent. The third area, of course, is the area associated with our racial tension, which blew up in the United States and ultimately across international borders. And then finally, this year, in a very real way, climate has come home with a vengeance. All of those issues, climate, racial tension, global economic recovery, and ultimately dealing with this pandemic, can only be done in a multilateral sense. And on the one hand, in our politics right now, we have an emphasis on the one side of continued America being great again, which has in large sense made America isolated. And then we see what I think will be, should the election go in the other direction, a return probably to a role that the United States has had traditionally, which is global leadership. Not global hegemony, but global leadership, working with partners. Now, absent that, to your question, absent that, it has never been more important than now that the existing in-place international organizations, the OECD, NATO, the United Nations, and in particular the EU, these have a role and an importance to play right now given the absence of credible and coherent American leadership on the international stage that we've not seen before. And we've got to put emphasis on those organizations that are working, and we've got to do what we can to support.
Okay, thank you very much. I think all the statements, even if they addressed various angles, we've heard the need to work together, to cooperate, to use dialogue, and for the US to assume again some global leadership. Now, we've got almost 30 minutes left, and I would really like to turn to you, to the audience, and give you a chance to ask questions to some of the panelists. And maybe if I can encourage you, first of all, to stand up while you're asking your questions, because we have a long pole microphone. And also make sure you really ask a concise question. And maybe also challenge some of the panelists to come up with new ideas and solutions on many of the things we've just discussed now. So who wants to go first?
Member of the parliament, and I am for the third time in my life the head of Parliamentary Assembly delegation of Slovak Parliament to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And in this point I would make first a remark, and then I try to be realistic or perhaps a little bit skeptic concerning the motto together and dialogue at any price. 5 years ago, I was observing the presidential election in Belarus. And now we hadn't been invited timely enough, so we hadn't been there. But what I saw with my own eyes, I participated in 20 election observations, starting in Berlin and ending in Almaty. But such a fraud like was 5 years ago in Belarus, for me, there was no surprise what happened this year. And the problem is to have a dialogue with a person that is representing an empire of evil. We had historical knowledge about dialogue at any price. One such happened in 1938 in Munich. It was our price. We have to pay this any price. Yeah. And that's why I'm skeptical towards the position we should have a dialogue with Lukashenko. It's not a way to speak with Hitler, to speak with Lukashenko. We should be somehow cautious in having dialogues with clear enemies of our values, because our warm heart is for them a sign of weakness.
I see your point. Would you like to ask a question? Because that was really a statement, and maybe you would want to address it to Mr.
As you said, to the tendency that we should deal with dictators as with partners that are worse to be dealt with.
Okay, so that's not a question, it's a statement. So everyone else, I would really encourage to make questions, and maybe you also have someone that you want to ask the question to directly. So before giving any of you the floor again, maybe someone else wants to ask a question. So I know this gentleman, Mr. Marcel Pesco.
My name is Marcel Pesco. I'm currently at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm former director of the Conflict Prevention Center at the CPC. And I share the view that the only way forward is dialogue. But my question is, how can you base a dialogue while you don't have a common vision? While you don't have a shared values and shared principles? We have all these on the paper. But when we started the dialogue in Helsinki in '75, even with the devil representatives of the devil imperia, like Brezhnev, for instance, that time, we had at least the vision that we will be building a cooperative environment through dialogue, that we will be addressing the issues jointly. Do we have it today? Mr. Kachar, Ambassador Kachar mentioned that, but is it there? Do we have a readiness to restart this vision type of approach and seeking for common ground? Or are we going towards the building up again of imperia of influence and dividing lines, and then, of course, inevitably towards the conflict on the regional level or even the global level?
Okay, thank you very much. I think after these two questions, I would like to turn to the podium. So one statement was very direct. It said that we cannot have dialogue at any price. And the other one was your question, which said, how can we have a dialogue if we have no common vision? Maybe Ambassador Kacha, you would like to answer it? I'm guessing Mr.
Yes.
Bushati also wants to say something, maybe you, Foreign Minister. Yep. I don't know.
Briefly, because this was a little ball by Mr. Peshko here, Marcela would agree with you on this. The world is more complicated today as probably was. Though we were closer to confrontation, say, a nuclear or conventional those years, and maybe that division, which was more black and white, was pushing us for some vision, you know, to save the reality which was there. Today, we got in a world which is much more fragmented, as it was before. It's much more, how to say, what is the right English word, diluted, fuzzy, uncertain. And it's much more players. And even inside our own communities, we are fragmented on vision. Because if we will look where European Union is today, and how this virus created a new divisions, new lines, and new wave of nationalism here, I absolutely agree with you. I'm just hoping very much that at least this will be an impetus for us to come on a smaller level with united visions, which then can grow up. But there is a certain grain of skepticism here at place that it's hard to have common vision. But for us, it's an issue, and we should have a sense of urgency and sense of sanity here in the region, in this Visegrad region, and in European Union as such, that it's urgent for small countries like us, and we need to be rational on that, because it would come, as Stefani was saying, a minister was saying, in the world of competition of great powers, we are not able to catch up in this competition of great powers without being strong within EU on that. And just a little footnote on Mr. Osuski's question, you are right, they should be the bottom line, where you talk to the authoritarian rule. They should be. We should try honestly, we should try with an open heart, we should involve into dialogue, we should not fight with our own means, so we should be honest in our approach, but there is the bottom line. There is a line which you will not go under and say, no way. And then we will use different tools, means and ways how you deal with a situation like this. I absolutely agree.
Okay, so basically you're saying there is a red line also to dialogue.
There is a red line, yes.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering if on this, Mr. Bushati, you wanted to maybe come in, because this is really so much about OSCE, and I guess this is all you're dealing with currently, or a lot about it.
Yes, that's true. There is so much about the OSCE and the security environment surrounding the OSCE area, but not only. I fully agree with the colleagues that the environment has been constantly in deterioration. So therefore, we have to be realistic, and being realistic, for me, it's important to align the reality with our minds. So it's extremely difficult to speak about a joint vision of 57 participating states coming from very different historical backgrounds and traditions. But on the other hand, it's very important to speak about the common denominators of the organizations. And we have seen in certain aspects the organization has been able to provide assistance to the participating states, and also to act as a honest broker. But in other cases, it was simply not possible because of the rules that have been agreed or interpreted in such a way that did not allow the organization to act. So the key question for me, it's trust. We need to restore trust, and we need to restore trust among participating states. And now it's not anymore the classical type of debate we have seen in the past, East versus West or West versus East, because of this defragmentation that we are all discussing. It's much more complicated, and in some cases it's based even in the thematics. And then it's also a question of instruments that are at our disposal that can allow to see the results in the practice. In some cases, it has been even more difficult to draw a red line, and in some cases we have appeared like drawing a line into a sand. So this is very important for the credibility of the organization, and this is going to be very important for the credibility of international order in general.
Okay, so thank you very much. I know that it's complicated in the OSCE area because the interests are so different, but I still have several examples in mind where I think if interests converge, something can be done. Now, I was wondering if there are more questions here in the audience to some of the other panelists. Please raise your hand. Yes, Foreign Minister, please come in.
Yes. Anyway, I firmly believe that the UN, OSCE, and other international organizations should remain at the forefront of global cooperation and should serve as a platform for the dialogue. Anyway, the international organizations have legal frameworks, have rules and norms for the cooperation between the members. Especially the principle of consensus in OSCE gives the opportunity to hear the voice of even very small state. So we don't have small or big states in the organization. We have the state which has the same right as a superpower or other members of these organizations. So therefore, I vote for that we should keep the dialogue in the framework of any organization. Thank you.
Yes.
We are having international law, and this country really believes in international law. But we already seen, for instance, in Georgia or Crimea, how weak is international law. So let's start to think together. What should be the painful moments for some countries if we want to keep international law? Because so far we only have some possibilities which somehow works. For instance, European Union introduced a sanction list just recently for Belarus. 40 Belarusian politicians and those who are responsible for terrorist attacks against their own citizens. But we can easily see for 6 years how these sanctions are working against, for instance, a country like Russia. We need to find another place where any kind of activity could be painful enough to stop these countries to break international law. So maybe this is the open question mark for all of us. What should be the painful moment?
So you're saying the sanctions, in your view?
That's one of the options, but as we can see, for 6 years, if it comes to the relationship between Europe and Russia,
yes,
it doesn't work that well as we believed.
I was wondering, General Allen, whether you would want to come in here, because this is also always a big question mark in the US, how to deal with Russia. And from a European standpoint, it's quite puzzling, because on the one hand, it seems the policy towards Russia in the US has remained stable, but then when looking at some of the president's comments, it's not very clear to us. So I'm wondering, where do you see this relationship going with Russia?
Well, look, I tried to come in a couple of times during this conversation. It's really important. First, I would say to the comment about not talking to adversaries, I understand why individuals would not want to, but I would also say that during the darkest moments of the Cold War, the United States was always willing to talk to the Soviet Union. And this is where comments of other colleagues on the stage are very important. At times like these, we have to go back to first principles. And we have to understand what our values are. The common values that we have that formed organizations like the EU, the OECD, in particular NATO, these are first principles for us right now. And when other things seem to be drifting on the wind, we have to understand what we stand for. So when we go to talk to the Russians, we have to ensure that our values are on display and that our values shoot through the entire conversation that we have. You asked a question about American policy with respect to Russia. I don't know what it will be in the next administration. If it's Biden administration, I think it's going to be something Russia will not like at all. Under this administration, I think we have held a line to some extent, but the president's public statements about the Russian has been very confusing to Americans as well as confusing to our allies as well. Now, I led a program a couple of years ago, a GLOBSEC program on NATO adaptation. And one of the conclusions that we had as we went through that long study, and I would commend the study to anyone who's interested in where we ended up on the issue of Russia in the global south, was that first and foremost, we have to understand what our principles are, what our values are. And from those agreed values, there is a lot that we can accomplish together. We may not have the same views on all issues, but those common values can be inserted directly into the conversation with the Russian, directly into the conversation with the Chinese, so that we don't have a conversation where somehow the Uyghurs and 1 million Central Asians in the People's Republic of China who are interned right now in camps, that does not get the attention that liberal democracies must bring to it. So my point would be that we have to go back at this moment, when there's so much in change, so much that is shifting around us. Let's agree on what our first principles are, and then we can begin to have the conversation. And I will simply tell you that one thing we're looking at very hard for the potential for a next administration is a revolutionary concept on the thinking of the global community of democracies. You know, when we talk about the West, often about the West is exclusive. It's about Europe and the transatlantic relationship. But let's remember that there are vibrant democracies in other places in the world. And the more we're able to combine our values, as they are asserted in liberal democratic societies, the strength of our economies, the advances technologically, and most democracies in the world have technological advantages. The more we're able to come together on those points, the greater will be our capacity to do good for humanity, not to confront the Chinese, but ultimately to outcompete the Chinese, not to confront the Russians, but to make it very clear that our combined set of commitment, both to the values, international law, as Martin said, and ultimately to a combined approach economically, that they're not going to be able to compete with that. And we better understand that aberrant behavior that seeks to undermine democracy is going to come at a cost. Now, we're not there right now, and we'll see where the American election takes us. And I think a lot will be determined based on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I was wondering if there are some reactions in the audience, because I'm very sorry, I cannot see the questions on my iPad, unfortunately. So I'm not able to take them online, unfortunately. So I was hoping maybe someone else here in the audience would want to come in, because we've raised a lot of complex issues. Yes, please, there's someone over there. And maybe you have some direct questions how these issues can be solved.
Okay, I'm sorry. My name is Adrian Neumann. I work for the Institute for Security Policy at the University of Kiel. And I would like to ask a question to the panelists. When we speak about Russia, I think it's always, first of all, important in the discussion to distinguish between Russian elites and always the societies or civil societies. And in this I ask, are we doing enough in reaching out to the civil societies in that sense? So one thing is, of course, let's say Navalny, the case of Navalny, and we say, okay, we should have more sanctions. That can be the one part. But on the other part, wouldn't it make sense to say, to also double down, will now increase or decrease the costs of German classes at the Goethe Institute, or decrease the costs of English classes at the British Council, in order to reach out more to the civil society, which normally, if I would think of Russia, is definitely not in the interest of the Russian government. And in comparison to China, Russia is still quite accessible, at least from the outside. And I wondered if we should not, our arsenal of, if we want to compete and talk about values, should not use this part, our soft power that we have more, and the money that we have more, to make more attractive offers to the civil society to show, hey, that's also what we can do. If we think about how the Cold War ended, it was because our economic system, we had something to offer that the Soviet system could not offer. And if that hadn't been the case, if their system would have worked better economically for the people, we probably wouldn't be here today the way we are here. Thank you.
And so the question is whether the support for the civil society is something that should be...
I think there's not being enough done. We always talk about the hard stuff of punishing, but the punishment can also be, okay, then we'll talk more and make more office to your people.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to react maybe to that? Yes, Mr. Klus.
If it comes to our government, because we tried to use this soft diplomacy if it comes to Belarus, we offer a couple of thousands euro for students coming from Belarus to Slovakia. But there is a problem with the brain drain then, because some of them are not willing to come back and to use their knowledge they get in European Union back in Belarus. So this is something we need to deal with. We are having the same problem, by the way, with the Slovak students in Czechia and Germany as well, and some other countries. Well, I completely agree with you. I'm a product of soft diplomacy of the United States, of Norway, of some other countries, and I fully agree with you. That really changed my life somehow. But how to do that properly to make sure that these people will then really help to their own countries, this is the question mark we are having. But we at least tried, and as far as I know, 23 of Belarusian students have to come to Slovakia very soon.
Foreign Minister or Ambassador Kacha, if you want to say something to this question of soft power versus sanctions, what works better?
Briefly, because we are NGO, so I have a lot of good understanding for the role of civic society, absolutely, and I'm with you on this. Here, the problem is that in Russia, the treatment of civic society is extremely harsh. So if you want to come from outside and support civic society, which is existing there, you hit the rock. And I can assure you that everybody here in this community completely and very sharply and precisely understands the division between those who are responsible for the regime and the people of the country, which is maybe the regime holder is a tip of the iceberg, but the rest, it's a society for which we have a lot of admiration, a lot of sympathy, and a lot of inclination. The problem is precisely how not to avoid the brain drain of people that you would offer them something out there in the EU or what used to be programs in the United States to help educate and etc. The most efficient way will be how you bring the knowledge out there. We should fight with our means because we are free society, free democratic society, so fight with our means, not with counter-propaganda, but with facts, arguments, and help. And it's complicated. But I want to come also to point where you hint on difference between Russia and China, because it's substantial difference. And probably I wanted still to react a little bit on your ball, which you played on the argument of John Allen. And generally, you're absolutely right. This is not only to confront, this is to compete, and compete in a fair way and win that competition. Because if we want to be true to our own values, we need to win also hearts and minds of our own people in society. And in this world, which is more and more complicated by this shitstorm and this info war which is going on, we need to remind ourselves that, again, our weapons are our values, and we need to outperform and outcompete out there. And it comes also to your point in that question, because this should serve as a superior model, which will be sexy, which will be attractive on long run. That's the bottom line.
I think, Foreign Minister, you wanted to say something on that point.
I just feel that I have to answer this question because Kazakhstan has a common historical past with Russia, with Belarus. We transformed from Russian Empire state to Soviet Union. We had together more than 70 years coexisted, and in the Soviet Union, the common space. So, and one day the Soviet Union was collapsed. And even me, I was educated in Marxism, Leninism's theory. So what do you expect at the first day that we can just take the European democratic values, you just transform and put to all our countries? Definitely not, because we should to develop our civil society, the power of the NGOs. So therefore, please consider our countries as in the development. So, for example, nowadays our new president introduced some new incentives, amendments in the laws on the election, on the NGOs, on the parliament. He just set up the Council of National Trust, so where our president sits together with all NGOs and even bloggers and can freely trustful discuss the whole issues of our civil society. Just recently, Kazakhstan had signed the second facultative protocol on the Civil Rights Convention about the rejecting of the death penalty. So this becomes stage by stage in the development. So you couldn't expect that in one day just we had the all values, so European values, and put it in our society. Same things with the Muslim countries and other Asian countries. So, but definitely as a member of the OSCE, we share the common values, and we have the common goals where we are moving together, and with our partners, with the sharing experience, we will move forward in means of the democracy.
Just a very short final thought.
I already mentioned lead by example if it comes to European Union and climate issues. So maybe Kazakhstan should be a good example for the other post-Soviet countries if it comes to business, civil rights, and so forth. Make sure that we can help as much as it gets.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting final thought. I know it's been a very complex and multifaceted discussion, and I'm again very sorry for those who tried to ask questions online that I couldn't see them on my screen. Now, before we wrap up, I have to tell you, was told to inform you about the fact that next session here will be with the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, and in about 5 minutes from now. And if the room is too crowded, you can also watch it in the other room, in the Habsburg room. So again, thank you very much to our very distinguished panel, and to the audience for asking all those interesting questions. I hope we managed to shed at least some light on all these different questions. And yes, thank you very much, and maybe give them a round of applause, and to all the people joining online.